Hello, welcome back to the studio. As you can see, a canvas, but I'm not really sure what I'm painting this week. You see, sometimes we're just not that inspired. We're just sort of, lacking something. And it's a very common thing, I think, for people who are creative. Hit a bit of a dry spell, a bit of writer's block or painter's block. And we have to find a way of getting sort of out of that before it becomes sort of too ingrained in us. It's far too easy just to sit back and say, oh, well, I'll give painting a miss for a while, and then suddenly 6 months has gone by. So I thought, let's see what we can do to sort of trigger some ideas. And I asked Terry, I said, what shall I do? And she said, let's do a lucky dip. She says, I'll call out a number, which will be the series and the number of the painting. So she said, it's 15-7. So off I go to our little library of books, and I get book number 15, and I turn to page number 7, and I'm not that inspired, I have to say. So she said, I tell you what, I'll give you a number either side, so you can have 15-6 or 15-8. And if I've got my little pages marked properly, I have. That's the one that inspired me. Waves of Wonder. I don't think I've ever seen this painting before, but it's obviously been in the book all this time. I just haven't seen it. So this is the inspiration, Waves of Wonder. I wonder what sort of waves I'll paint. So let's get started and get that inspiration going. First things first, planning. It's always planning, isn't it? But for this one we need to plan the horizon line. And as you can see, and it mentions in the little notes there, the horizon line's a little bit above center. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to measure a little less than halfway. This is a 16 by 20, so 8 inches would be halfway. So if I go to 7 inches and make a little mark, 7 inches, I'll put one on the other side, and then I'm going to use a little bit of masking tape to put the horizon line across my painting. And that way I can paint the sky and then pull the tape off afterwards, and then get into the seascape part of my painting with that perfectly straight horizon line. Okay, so I'm using my regular 1/2 inch masking tape. I'm going to go below those lines and have a look at my reference picture. Already I'm getting a bit of inspiration back. I think I could do with something back here. About 1/3 the way in, of course, a little bit higher than the horizon line, something here. I think I want a sailing ship, or at least a yacht. Maybe lose one of these rocks and move it over. That's what I need. Let's put a little sailing boat in my painting. My favourite place again, Pixabay. I found some nice line drawings of some sailing boats, and I'm not sure about the size. I think that one might be a bit on the big side. That one there, I fancy, will be about right. So I've got to get this image onto my canvas and yet still be able to paint a sky and find it afterwards. I think this is a job for a bit of tracing and maybe even some masking tape. Let's see how I manage to get something on my canvas permanently whilst I finish my painting. So here's my little line drawing. As you see, I've used a little bit of tape just to secure it to my worktop. If I flip it back, you see I've rubbed the back of it with some graphite from a pencil and laid down a couple of strips of this wide masking tape. I used a biro or ballpoint pen and simply traced it onto the tape. To help position this little sailboat onto my painting, I used that stencil again. It's got the graphite on the back, and I want to position it, about 1/3 in from the side and a little bit below the horizon line. Once again, I want to make a little mark on the canvas just to give me somewhere to line up the little sticky. Incidentally, I cut that out with a pair of scissors off camera. The air was blue, but still, I managed to cut it out without snipping the sail off the second time around. There we go. I put a couple of little marks on the canvas, and here's my cutout, my little sticky on the masking tape, and you see I'm just going to line it up with my little marks. This will mean it's in exactly the right position. There we go. Hang on, pickle alert. That's right. we've got to get things in the right order. Remember, the horizon line tape's going to come on first, and then I'm going to take off that little sticky later in the painting. So get things in the right order. Having avoided that little pickle, it's time to get on with painting the sky. And I'm going to be doing the sky portion of this painting with some Bob Ross liquid white oil paint. And this, as always, is going to be applied very, very sparingly, a very small amount. It means that I can paint one wet layer on top of another. I can add liquid white first, then colour on top, and then clouds on top of that. So, small amount of this applied to the canvas, and I've got some here in a little airtight container. And as always, I've got an old Bob Ross landscape brush. This one's well worn, and I want to take just a small amount. It's just like whipped cream, and this is just like thin oily paint, very slow drying. This will take at least 24 hours to become tacky. So you can put on a very small amount of this and spend hours and hours and hours playing with it, but I advise not to spend too long because you can just end up becoming a mud mixer. I think one or two of you who are new to oil painting are finding this out, that sometimes it's better to just get into the painting, do it, and then move on to something else, rather than working over and over and over on the same area 3, 4, 5 times. Now, I made a video all about applying liquid white. The little test is to use your fingertips to touch the canvas, and you want just a small amount of residue on your fingers so that you can still see your fingerprints. Careful around the sailboat. I'm going to brush out from that one so you don't lift off the edges. There. Finish it off. Some nice long flat strokes. Once again, careful around that sailboat. As usual, I want to reuse this brush. I don't want to put any more liquid white on my painting, so I put it through a little bit of paper towel, give it a nice pinch and a squeeze, and that sort of dry cleaned it enough to actually apply some colour. Speaking of which, here's my palette. And I've just put out a few colours to get me started. The first colour I'm going to put on is some phthalo blue, and this is for the top corners of my painting. Bob actually did blue in the background of the sky. He left the central portion open, and then what he did is he brush mixed phthalo blue and some crimson to make a nice lavender colour, and he swirled this on here through the centre and then used titanium white to paint clouds on top. It's a little different to the way I would normally do it, but it's fun. Let's try. So, dry clean brush and a little bit of phthalo blue. Now, for all you power painters out there who love putting on tons and tons and tons of paint, I'm going to give you the same heads up as I do other people. Phthalo blue is a real bully. It likes to take over everything. So use a sparing amount on your brush and really tap it out well. You want to knock off any excess. You also want to make sure you don't have any raw paint living in the corners of your brush. That looks a little bit on the raw side to me. Let's see what happens. See that initial streak there? If I do that, see there's like a little excess blue there. That's that little raw bit in the corner. Now, it won't matter too much because I'm going to just put on and let this colour blend with the liquid white. And here you see the beauty of using liquid white, because the paint I'm applying now can blend and it can be stronger at the corners and it can fade away into the centre a little bit more. And this is a way we can actually create lovely soft background skies. We can get rid of all our little brush marks and you can create these beautiful smooth surfaces. Now, without the liquid white, I'd still be here trying to get that first brush stroke to blend. The phthalo blue would have grabbed the canvas and would be stuck and staining the canvas like Billy-O. Here, I can just put it on, blend it out. Down just a little bit more. I'm putting a tiny bit more on my brush. When I say a tiny bit, this is what I'm doing, folks. I'm literally putting my brush back in that same spot and swirling it around. I'm not going back into the main pile, and even that is enough to pick up a little bit of colour. And there's a top tip for you. And I want to make sure my corners are dark enough. I think so. And there we go. So a nice bumpy surface there. And you see I got these nice sort of jaggedy bits in here. So when I put my clouds in, they'll fit nicely against the blue sky. And if you want to test your blue colour, see how much blue you have on there? Here's my little trick. Here's a little cloud. It's made of a piece of paper towel. And I look at it. This is pure white against my blue sky. Now, if my background sky was not blue enough, then it would be like putting white against white. It wouldn't show up very strongly, but you can see here I've got quite a bit of colour here. Looks quite nice, doesn't it? So there's an easy little test for you. Too pale. So let's get into a little touch of the alizarin crimson and a little touch of phthalo blue, and this will produce a stunning lavender colour. You can do. I quite like this sort of mid-purple colour. And again, we're going to put the shadow in first, then we're going to put some clouds on top. So what I'm doing at this stage is I'm just swirling in where I think my clouds are going to live. I'll leave a few holes here and there so I can put my clouds through. And this is sort of a random design for clouds. So you can't plan this too much, except to think about where you might want one mass of cloud and then maybe a second mass of cloud. And I know Bob takes his clouds off the top of the canvas. You can see I'm just using just the corner of my brush and just swirl this in. So let's do that. Let's take our cloud off the top like Bob did. There we go. And if you want more paint, well, I've got some here. I can pick this up and I can move it somewhere else. And if it's too much, that looks pretty strong, doesn't it? Pick some of that up and put it somewhere else. Maybe down on the horizon line. Now, top tip for you. My little sailboat's going to have some white sails. And if I paint a big white cloud here and then try and put my little sailboat on top, it's not going to show up. So the one thing I do make sure is that I give my sailboat a good shadow colour right behind it, so that my little sailboat is really going to stand out. There we go. So clouds next. You can use a choice of brushes here. You often see me using a fan brush to paint clouds, and you've seen me using a 1-inch brush to paint clouds. The fans I tend to use on a corner and paint little circles with, and the 1-inch brush you see me load it with a little bit of paint and stab it on there, just kind of blast away and make some lovely soft little clouds. But let's try adding little clouds by doing some small circles, just for a change. Now this is quite a fresh, soft new brush, pretty new and pretty springy, whereas this old brush is a little bit kind of rough and well worn. So I'll keep that one on standby, but this is a nice, fresh, springy brush is what I'm going to use. And I'm going to take just a little titanium white on the corner of my brush. Now, there we go, just a little. You hold that against the painting. That's really shocking, isn't it? I think this should be toned down a little bit. I'm going to put a little touch of red out and paint my clouds in a slightly off-white colour. Sit tight. Okay, I'm back. I'm going to put a tiniest amount of red on my brush, work it into my white, so that my white is white with a hint of red. Against my background. It still looks pretty white, doesn't it? Now, get the corner of your brush, and we're talking just the very, very corner. I'm going to go right on top of that big blob of lavender I put there with a fresh lot of paint, and just swirl. Put in some lovely soft broken edge clouds. Remember, that's the shadow colour and this is the highlight. As you do this, you're going to pick up a little colour. It's okay. And remember, we're going straight in with the brush. And when we hit that lavender colour, we're going to leave that alone for just a minute. I want to save that shadow through there. So just sit my brush and just spin. And I'm actually leaning on the canvas pretty hard. I'm not just letting it kind of sit there and float around too much. I want my brush to engage with the canvas. I'm really kind of pressing in a little bit harder here. It kind of gives a lovely soft look to my painting. I'm trying to keep my hand out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. But I kind of got to come on. If I come on at a funny angle, then my brush kind of skids off the cloud, which won't make a very nice painting. So try to come in sort of straight at the canvas if you can. Get my hand below the brush. There you go. Now you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so keep that in mind. The angle of attack of those bristles must be straight at the canvas. I'm wondering now whether I shouldn't have done a cloud and a blend, a cloud and then blend. Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter now because I've got it all on the canvas, but you go, see, sometimes your brain does sort of kind of like does a little double take as you're painting away. You think, so, well, maybe I should have done something different there, but oh well. Okay, I'm going to dry clean that brush a little bit. Again, still this nice soft brush. Just want to knock off some surplus paint. And I want to leave those bright edges alone. I want to sort of soften up some of these inside edges, so the shadow part of my cloud. And again, just with a few hairs and some air, just give it a little light tickle. Don't kill all that lavender. Go up into the cloud, down, up into the cloud and down. So you're kind of working in and out of the clouds. Pick up a little colour, blend it out. Super soft. And there we go. Just give them a little tickle. Don't sit in one place kind of working away at it furiously. I try and paint my clouds with as much speed as I can, and then I leave them the heck alone. Because if I touch this too much, I'm going to start losing so much of my beautiful effects. Dry clean my brush one more time. And you see these lovely flaky edges here. I'm going to use the side of my brush. What I'm doing here is I'm just literally going to just touch the canvas and just stroke it. No pressure at all. Okay, and what happens is those lovely sort of fluffy edges there, the paint's a little bit thick, they kind of get rolled back into the center of the cloud. Now, if you want them to look even fluffy, you can fluff them up. And that just pushes the paint off the edge of the cloud and they look even softer. Or you can make them look firmer and pull them in. Okay, there was a lot of paint there. Now these ones, I don't want to lose them. I'm going to pull them in. Look at that. Isn't that a cracking sky? Huge clouds. I should imagine he's making for the harbour. And I'm going to just finish that off with some long flat strokes. And this just gets rid of any last little brush marks on my canvas. When people look at this, they see it from a distance, they'll come up close to it and they'll wonder, how did you get so much depth? How did you get, and they'll be kind of looking at it from the side and wondering, how you did it. And the trick is to make sure you don't leave a brush mark. There you go. That's a tip for you. And of course, I'm going to stand back at the other side of the studio and make sure I like what I see. So there we have it, a lovely fluffy sky. And I really enjoyed doing that technique. See, my enthusiasm for this painting is growing by the minute. I stood back and I think that it's a temptation to want to come back and maybe put a bit more white into it, brighten things up a little bit. But here's where I'm going to urge you to do a little bit of forethought, a little bit of thinking ahead. You see, because if I make my sky really bright, full of lovely white vivid colours, then, well, my little sailboat's going to suddenly be very sort of playing second fiddle. A little bit of planning, a little bit of thinking ahead can really give you a big advantage when you're doing a painting. I want my little sailboat sails to stand out, and I don't really want a busy sky behind it. Now, I think I'm happy with my clouds, and I'm going to peel off the tape, because that is the next step. As I get to the sailboat, I'm going to cross my fingers and hope I don't pull it off. Success! The next step of my painting is to do the seascape part. And for this, I'm going to be using some Bob Ross liquid clear oil paint. I'm going to apply this, again, very sparingly to the lower part of my canvas. And you're going to see the difference between using a liquid white and a liquid clear in the fact that the sky will be nice and soft and pastel, and the sea will be much sort of sharper. I've washed my brushes from yesterday and I've dried them thoroughly, make sure they're completely dry. And I've got a small amount of liquid clear in one of my little airtight containers, and this should be very sort of thin and runny like honey, quite sort of liquid. And you want to apply this once again very sparingly, even more sparingly than you did with the sky. There is a great tendency just to put on too much of this because it's difficult to see. It's hard to know where you've been, and of course where that little sailboat is, you must be very careful there. And I'm going to just come up really close under my sky here, just work it in. Now you can test your canvas, and what you need to do is you need to get a light, and I'll go and fetch a light in a minute. And what you want to be able to do is run your finger across the canvas and not leave any kind of a trace of a sort of trail or a fingerprint. It wants to be so thin it just feels slightly damp. Okay, let me get a light and we'll test our canvas. Okay, so I've got my mobile phone, I've turned it on to torch, and as you can see there's a little sort of sheen of oil on my painting. If I run my finger across it, you can see it leaves a little bit of a trail, and it actually feels a little bit too oily, especially up here. You can see it's really quite wet up there. Let me move my, there you go, see that's really far too wet. It wants to be much more thinly applied than this. So I'm going to use what's on my brush and make it cover the entire canvas. I think there's enough there, one little dip, to do practically everything. I've given everywhere in the sea area a thin even coat of liquid clear. I'm just going to take my torch on my phone, just do a quick test, and you can sort of see the shine from that oil. And I can honestly say, even being very careful, I still managed to get it a little bit thick. In some places, a little bit too wet. A couple of dry spots here and there, but under here, it's a little bit too much. And I think liquid clear is one of those liquids that you need to really apply so sparingly. And I'm going to just take a paper towel and just gently blot off some of the surplus. Now don't go scrubbing at it. You just want to literally run it across the surface and pick up the excess. And if I put my light across it now, you can see there's still a little bit of a sheen, but it doesn't have that real wet look to it. So there we go. That was an easy fix. And I do advise you to do this before you apply colour or paint to your own canvases. Even if you think you've got just the right amount on, always do that little check with your light and a phone. It'll save you getting into a lot of pickles. Time to do some sketching. In Bob's original painting, he had obviously the wave as sort of quite a main feature. The wave and these rocks obviously were the painting. But of course, now I've put something in the background, a little sailboat, I need to rearrange things on this painting. For instance, I'm going to have the sort of second point of interest to be this wave. And of course it would interfere with the little sailboat. So I'm going to move the beehive of the wave over to the left side a little bit more into this area. I don't need these big rocks back there then, so they're probably going to go as well. So that's going to move over to here, the rocks will disappear, and I might move these rocks here on the beach, maybe down a little further into the corner, so there's a nice sort of play from one point to the next, across a diagonal to my painting. And that's very much of a classic sort of scene, going corner to corner from one point of interest to the other across the painting, rather than having things dotted around in 3 separate places, but to have them sort of lined up. So let's sketch the main wave. To sketch the wave, I'm going to use a filbert brush. And once again, I'm going to use some of this lavender colour, phthalo blue, a little bit of alizarin crimson. As I mentioned, I'm going to move things around a little bit, and I want the top of my wave to be, well, not too far below the horizon line, fairly high up. So let's put a little mark, just somewhere like that. Now, the reason why I'm going to do that here is because if I have my wave looking a bit too low, then it will look like I'm sort of looking down upon my, sort of looking down onto the wave that direction, yet looking off into the distance for my little sailboat. By lifting the wave up a little bit, just a touch, it means that everything looks like it's going off into the distance. So the position of the wave is quite important, but don't worry, if you put it in the wrong place and think, well, I don't quite like that, you can always move it a little bit. I'm going to move it across and down a tiny bit. And what I'm looking for really is the crest of the wave. And if I draw this sort of a shape for you, that's the crest. Here is what I call the saddle. It looks like a horse saddle to me. And that's where the wave will crash over. And I'm just sketching this lightly. Okay, so just going to do that nice little shape there, and a little bit of an angled line here. And quite quickly you see I've managed to create the shape of a little wave. This is the floor of the wave where it crashes onto the beach. So this is all going to be beach or shallow water. This is going to be the eye of the wave, and this is where the wave is going to be sort of building, and this is where it's going to be crashing. Now, as you see, it's about the same distance in from the side as my little sailboat, so it's quite nicely balanced. Now, if I'd have moved that across a little bit further to here, this will all look a little bit crushed up. Remember, we're going to be putting a rock on the end here as well, so that little corner piece there is probably going to be taken up. Again, I'm thinking ahead. I don't want to crush everything in too much, so maybe that should be back a little bit further. I've taken my old 1-inch brush and I've given it a good dry clean to get rid of all the liquid clear on there, so that I can do this with it. I can rub things out. There we go, that's pretty much gone. And let's move the eye of my wave from here back to here. And you might think, well, it's only a 1/2 inch or so. What was the point of that? But you would be surprised at how much of a difference that's going to make to the balance of your finished picture. There we go, and this is where it's going to be flipping over. Now suddenly I've got room for a nice rock. I've got a nice balance between the sailboat and the wave. This doesn't feel as though it's all compressed into one corner, and there's still room beneath it for a nice beach area. I've even got room for some little background waves on here as well, one of which is obviously going to be where a little a little sailboat's going to be sitting. So again, you see a little bit of this sort of sketching out can really make a big difference to your painting. And so you can just kind of sit here and have some fun with this and sketch some nice wave shapes. Now remember, between here, which is a long way away, and here, that's quite some distance. So it's no good having giant waves in this part. It'll look really wrong. So you've got to keep everything a little bit sort of shallow back in there. And then as you come forwards, we can start thinking about putting in a little bit more shape to our waves, so we can get them a little bit more sort of bigger sized. See, and again, I'm just playing, I'm just sketching the shape of my waves. If I'm not happy, I pick up my brush, I can rub this all out, and change it all again. So don't be scared to play with your seascapes. Don't be scared to have a little bit of an experiment, a bit of a play, and a bit of a sort of try out with it. And even do this on an old scrap canvas. Just play around and see what you can do. And you would be surprised actually sometimes just doing what I'm doing here. Just letting the brush sort of swoop around a little bit. Yeah, just do some little dips like that. And before you know it, you've sort of got a bit of a seascape happening. Now remember, this is coming up. Okay. This is very steep in here because this is the eye of the wave. This is where the water's crashing over. This is where it's building. So these angles want to be a little bit steeper, less steep, almost flat. So this is all building to the point where it all topples over and crashes onto the beach. And there's that nice circular shape to your wave. If you learn how that shape works, then you can sketch your waves 100% every time. You can get them right every time. Okay. I think it's about time we filled in some of this background water here. I'm just going to use a little bit more of that lavender colour, and I might use a filbert brush to do it because I think I'm doing quite well with that. I've put a little bit of phthalo green out on my palette as well, but I'm going to carry on with that lavender colour, and I may actually use a little Prussian blue just to sort of darken down some of this water now. Excuse me. See, it's that the inclusion of that little bit of Prussian blue though really kind of strengthens up the colour here quite a bit. And you see now what happens when you use liquid clear, that of course it doesn't make anything particularly pastel. Everything really stays bold and strong. So you've got to be a little careful how much paint you use. And I put a little bit too much Prussian blue on my brush just then. Look what's happened. Wow. It's a huge impact on my painting, so you've got to be a little more careful with liquid clear. Now, I think the light should be coming more towards the left-hand side of this painting. So I want the water on this side to be a little bit sort of lighter. So I'm going to use a little bit less paint on my brush. Where this wave flips over, comes crashing forwards, I again know from a little kind of previous experience of painting waves that you do need a colour behind it, because this is going to be quite bright here, and if you don't have enough colour behind it, it's all going to get a little bit kind of lost and get some little bits of foamy effects in here next. Try and see how our wave is going to fit with the rest of the painting. Before I carry on, I need to mix up a colour called Seascape White, and it's titanium white, a nice little bit, and yellow ochre, and we're just taking just a tiny drop of yellow ochre. This colour wants to be literally white with a hint. If I hold it against my painting, doesn't that look startlingly white? And yet you can see it's actually not. It's just got that lovely sort of warm ochre tint to it. Now, ochre and white. And I've just put a little drop of linseed oil on my liner brush here. I'm going to do what Bob did in his background. He used to just drop in these long, thin waves. And remember, the ones up on the horizon line are very, very small. This is where you can fix any of those little oopses and mishaps if you've got any little gaps at the horizon line. And I'm just literally going to just drop these in. Okay, I've swung you round to the side now so you can sort of see past my hand. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing like long flat waves, and they're way off back in the distance here. And the trick is not to kill all of the blue. Where you see these little dark patches, they're your friends, because that could be a little distant wave. Okay, could be one of these jobs, but a long way away off. So I trying to save those little dark ones. There's another little dark one there. Yeah, and another little dark one there. You see, so they're kind of your best friends when you're painting. When you're painting a wave, in fact, I can almost sort of see some nice waves forming along here. Do a little bit of time lapse through this section here. Again, just dropping in more of these little wave patterns, and as I come forwards, I might pick out something, well, between this size and this size, I might go for something, a little bitty wave somewhere in here. So there you saw in that little bit of time lapse how I went through here and I just put in some more of these little details. Once again, I didn't spend too long on this. I added a few more little bright crests of waves on the horizon line. I had a few little gaps in there, and as I say, I want this side to look a little brighter, and I need to just put a little touch of highlight on the waves in the background here, but I want to get them a little bit more muted. Definitely brighter this side, definitely darker that side, but occasionally I move things around. You saw sometimes I might pick up my original dark brush and just kind of cut through. If I had a bit of a straight line going on, which I thought was a little bit too obvious, I could just literally just go through that line and just put a little bit of dark through there again, and you can just move the waves around. Anything too big or too bold, you could just knock it out. It's, as I say, painting waves is like a feeling. You just have to put paint on there and then sit back from it and see if it looks right. But just keep thinking about water going up and down. It's just like a symphony of movement, rippling backwards and forwards across the canvas. Really, I want to try and concentrate on this one next, because this really, that's sort of, with the sailboat, those are the two main elements. And really, you're not looking for too much detail back here. It's a bit like having a busy sky overtaking the importance of the sailboat, and the same with the background sea. If this is too busy, it takes it away from this foreground wave. So let's work on this bit next. I'm going to carry on with my filbert brush because it's working really well, and this time I'm going to sort of just start tinting my colour with a little touch of phthalo green. Not entirely phthalo green. Phthalo green and phthalo blue have to share the same characteristics of being a little bit of a bully. So I'm going to tone that down with a little touch of Prussian blue. So you put a little touch of Prussian blue in it, and you can go from sort of that really eye-popping green colour, which is almost like a tropical green colour. Put a little bit of Prussian blue with it. You can calm it right down. And I really want some of this nice sort of phthalo green colour in my wave. Now then, look at that colour. I got the smallest amount on my brush, and yet it absolutely takes off, doesn't it? And again, think about the shapes of this wave. You're coming up and you're curving around and curving over. And I'm not going to put a ton of paint in the eye of my wave. But this is a bit of a classic sort of Bob Ross wave. It should have a sort of a natural sort of fall to it. And this is the floor of the wave. This is where the water's very shallow, or it's the beach. So you really want to keep that in mind, that you can't have this wave sort of coming down to here, because this is further back. This is the floor of the wave, so it's an important marker on your painting. So if I had a green wave and a blue sea, it would look really odd. So don't forget, sometime come back in here and just add back in maybe a little touch of this green colour. Okay, so you might just put in a little touch of green here and there, just to kind of knit the two halves of the painting together. So you have to work backwards and forwards with the seascape. Sometimes you do have to sort of do a little bit of this, then go back and do a little bit of something else. So you see, just by putting in a little touch of green here and there, now my wave sort of looks like it fits more with this painting. But I think what I'll do is I will take my palette knife and I'll scratch back on the shape of this wave for you, because you can't really see it. So there's the crest of the wave. Okay, there is the top of the wave. this is the way the water's going here, and the wave is coming down to this sort of area. Now this doesn't have to be straight. In fact, it can look quite good if it's not straight. So there's the shape of my wave. This water's going that way, and this water is going that way. Okay, so that was quite a good thing for me to see on my own painting. So I can come back in here and fix these gaps. There we go. Right, eye of the wave is next. For the eye of my wave, I want to mix up white with a touch of yellow, cad yellow, or a little bit of that Seascape yellow colour, the Seascape white colour, white with a little touch of ochre. And for this we're going to need a clean filbert brush. If you don't have a clean filbert brush, you could just go on with a 1-inch brush, just put it straight into the canvas. The important thing is to make sure that there is not a lot of paint here. If you want to get that lovely kind of transparent look that Bob got with his waves, and there's a ton of paint in here, then I suggest you do this with your finger. Just run your finger over it and just remove the excess paint. Okay, you'll find that you do that and you can save yourself a lot of heartache with kind of getting these paints too mushy. So, clean dry filbert brush. I'm going to take some Seascape white, a little touch of cad yellow, a little touch. Yeah, just white with a hint of yellow. And trick, if there is a trick to it, it's remember this is where the foam is going to go. This is the eye of the wave in here, and between the two there's a shadow line. I nicknamed it the mascara line because if you let the two touch each other, then you lose that sort of 3D effect. And remember that the brightness is coming from this side, so I want to get kind of up in the top and left hand side of my wave, and putting my brush in there. I'm really kind of pushing this down into the canvas. And I'm kind of working away from the eye of the wave. A little kind of circular stroke, keep that little shadow line. There we go. And already you can kind of see that transparency happening. And you can have that transparency in other places on the wave as well. It doesn't have to just be limited to the eye of the wave. You can try and get it into a couple of other spots if you really want to. Okay. Baby wipe, get that off. Okay. I wash my hands fairly frequently through the day, so I'm not carrying a lot of paint around. Of this part of my painting, you want to be using just these few hairs. Remember how we twirled the clouds in? Well, you're going to twirl in the eye of the wave as well, and you're just sitting with just a few little hairs on the canvas. So take my hand to one side, and you're just going to literally just let the brush sit and twirl. Now, I already did a pretty good job with my filbert brush. You can kind of get this lovely transparency in. And as you work away from the eye of the wave, you're going to pick up colour. And what you don't want to do is go back to the top of the wave again, because you'll start carrying all that lovely colour back up into the top of the wave. See, I'm just going to be going. You can just kind of carry a little bit of this blue colour back into the eye of the wave if it's too bright. It's unusual actually. Most of the time the eye of the waves aren't bright enough. You see, because I was careful, I didn't put too much paint in there, I didn't have a problem. And as a finale, what I like to do is take my brush and to touch and to sweep the paint around. So I create the lovely curve. Now, you don't want to any paint, particularly paint on your brush, but you just want to go in with a little bit of pressure, press and pull. And remember those angles A nice curve shape there. Okay, a little bit less of a curve, less of a curve. You want to start straightening out now. So over here your wave shapes are going much flatter, and all I'm doing here is I'm just grooming the paint. Okay, and over here, pretty flat. I actually want to do this section next. Now I could put the foam in and then just paint this section in carefully. I've done that plenty of times before, but I think when you're doing seascapes, maybe this is your first seascape, it's probably better to get this section in first and then leave a little gap, and then you can put your foam through the centre of it. As I say, you'll see in a moment what I mean. I switched to a fan brush, and again I'm going back through my Seascape white colour. Give your brush a good groom through. As you can see, it still looks pretty white. And the stroke we're going to be doing is we're going to be coming along here, and then we're going to let the brush drop. We're using gravity, so we're going to let just our hand go across and just let the hand just fall away. And it's going to be falling towards this line, so it's going to be coming across and dropping away. Now, if you do this wrong, it means you've got to scrape it all off and redo it again, so it's not the end of the earth. But it's nice to do if you can kind of do it with a little confidence, okay? And the stroke goes from here to here. I don't want to lose all this lovely shadow under here. I want to keep that shadow. So I'm going to go along the top, and you get to here. See, I'm pressing into the canvas. I've got some pressure on it. And just flip. Change the camera angle for you a little bit. Now, I don't want to go over that necessarily so much because I'll lose a lot of the lovely detail I just put into there, but just so you can see it again, you're going to come along the top of the wave and flip. I just let my hand fall away. And you're going to go just beyond that one, and then you're going to give it another little drop. And look at all that lovely detail in there. Okay. Okay, so I've got this nice edge. And my brush, I loaded it just the once. And this is it's a bit of a, it's actually quite a new brush, but it actually feels quite crunchy. And I actually don't want to play with this too much because I will ruin this nice edge. Now you can see why I put that lovely deep shadow behind here. If there was too much detail back in here, then you wouldn't see that. It'd be kind of lost. Wait, this is the line you want to keep, because if you lose that, then this all kind of runs in together. But I will put on a little bit of extra shadow here just to make the wave kind of work a little better for me. Let's do that next. I've gone back to my original background brush. I've given it a bit of a dry clean. I've knocked off a lot of the paint that was on there. Got rid of that heavy colour, because there was greens and blues and all sorts back in there. And I've mixed up a little piece of lavender, so it's just crimson and phthalo blue. It's kind of lavender colour, but this is kind of dark. And I'm going to put in just a little touch of white. I want more of a sort of a grey-blue colour here. And I want to put in the shadow line in here, and I'm going to use a filbert brush to do this. And it wants to be darker than this background. There you go. And if you find that this brush is a bit too big and unruly for you, then if you've got a small round brush, then that's perfect. And I'm going to put this grey colour, this blue-grey colour, I'm going to put under here too. Now I'm not sure how this is coming out on the camera because I'm looking at my monitor sitting over just there, and this looks kind of like an electric blue colour, but I can assure you it's not. It's actually a grey colour, you can see there. No, it still looks electric blue. My monitor is showing me a colour that's not really terribly accurate. This is much more grey looking than blue. I'm going to just take some of this colour up into here. Again, keep your shadow in here, don't lose it all. Remember, this is the beach line, so we can't go lower than that. And I'm going to put some of this up into into here. Remember, don't neaten this all up. Keep this all looking nice and bumpy. There you go. Got a cup of tea there. He's got a cup of tea on the go. So you see my foamy shadow line all the way along there. I've got my old fan brush back. And again, I'm just kind of freshening up the bristles a little bit. And it doesn't matter if this isn't pure clean white. In actual fact, I quite like it if it's actually not perfect. I like it to be a little off colour. Let's pick up a little purple here. I'll explain a little later on why that's important. Okay, now let's see, I've got a nice amount of paint on the corner of my brush. And I'm going to use the corner of my brush to create foam. And it's a kind of a little bit of a stroke that looks like that. Press and flick. And it's just in this area in here. I'm going to try and film this so you can actually see it. So that's how my hand wants to go, so I'm going to go this way. And the idea is you're going to make little tiny circles with the corner of the brush. And you're going just above that grey foam. And occasionally you're going to press. And you're going to spit a little paint from the fan brush. See what happens? Let the bristles kind of crush. Look at that, you kind of get this little explosion. I'll go the other direction for you. Now, if you've got some nice, slightly crunchy fan brushes, then they're the best ones. This is kind of tight in here, but do your best. You might bump into that little piece of foam there. It's okay. We'll get that back. And then you want to come in under your shadow here. Again, press and push. And you've got to be kind of tough with your brush when you're doing this. And you want to really kind of push the brush and let the paint kind of explode a little bit. Get grubby white paint. And press. And let the bristles really open up. And create these nice. And I'm just doing one line here. I'm going to come back and I'm going to blend this a little bit. And then I'm going to come in and put some more foamy patterns in here. And I'm going to extend the foamy patterns along the top of my wave as well. To blend it, I'm going to use the brush that I did the eye of the wave with. It's the cleanest filbert brush I've got. Clean that off. And the blend wants to be between the foam and the shadow. So there's a little bit of that shadow colour on the brush, and that's absolutely fine. And this is a real small tickle. Bob would sometimes do this with the 1-inch brush. He could reach in there and just get that little gap. But I find that's a little bit hit and miss on a small canvas. You don't have quite the amount of real estate to play with that Bob had. Leave the tops of the wave. Just get some of that shadow in there. Just learn to play backwards and forwards with your waves. Don't think that you make a mess of things, you can't fix it. You can come back in and stab in a little bit of shadow there. Let's put a little bit more foam back in. There you go. So you can do all these kind of nice things with your paint. into a little bit of the shaping on here next, because that's what I want to do. I want to rework this part of my wave. But I'm jumping ahead again. Let's put a bit more foam in here, and I'll do a little bit of time lapse for this. Okay, time to stand back from our painting. You see, I've pulled the camera back a little bit, so my camera looks like it's wonky. It's just the angles. And as I stand back, I can see that my wave has grown. It's become quite big, hasn't it? Remember, the floor of the wave's here, and I've let it kind of slip down a little bit. It's grown bigger than I'd intended to. It means that really the wave and the sailboat now are kind of in competition a little bit. I don't know. But look at the shape of that amazing wave there. Even if I say so myself, that is really kind of the energy that I want to get into a wave. It's a little bright in here for my taste, and I'm going to calm it down. I'm going to put some little bits of detail in here, and I want a little bit of a beach in here. So I'm going to trim this down a little bit. I'm going to make sure that maybe I take away some of this wave. I might just kind of reduce the size down a little bit by just kind of lifting up the base in here. But in here I want to think about how the wave comes up onto the beach. And I want lots of lovely swirls and lots of lovely colours. I might not go for a sandy beach. I might just go for some shallow water through here and then drop in a ton of little patterns. But I hope that that little quick bit of seascapery kind of gives you an idea about painting a wave and gets those nice sort of classic shapes in here. But it's always a good idea, once you've been painting for a little while, to stand back from your painting. I know you get sick and tired of hearing me say that, but I know that if I sit on my painting for too long, I don't see it quite as I should. I kind of need to take at least 4 or 5 feet away from it and see if I like the shape of it, because maybe this is too high and too arched, and I could trim this off and move it around. I'm not going to do that with my painting this time, but I can only say that I'm pleased with the way it looks, and I'm pleased it's coming out nicely for this video. I need to put some dark in here. I want to put some foamy patterns on the beach. If I put white over this, it's just not going to show. See how these little light touches on the waves in the background, they really show up. So this isn't going to be dark enough. So I'm going to get back into my lavenders and my greens, and again, look how little paint I'm actually using. Okay, I'm going to be getting a little bit more into the Prussian blue colour. So I do need a little bit more paint on my brush. It's a little bit greenish, but once again, I use a little bit of paint on my brush. There is no liquid white on this, so all the colours that I apply go straight onto just my oily canvas. So none of these colours will be made pastel, they will all stay really good strong colours. As you can probably tell from my voice, I get passionate about my seascapes. I love painting seascapes. I love pushing energy into my paintings and getting a kind of nice sort of bit of movement going. Suggestions of shadow into the base of your waves. You've got to kind of remember that that is the pattern you're doing. Now I'm going to just use the side of my brush, and I'm just going to let it kind of bump. And when you look into a wave, you'll often see little bits of seaweed and all kind of manner of things being kind of pulled back up off the beach. And this is what I'm putting into my wave. I'm putting in all those little shadows, and I'm just using a little bit of paint. I'm just letting the brush just run and skip. Okay, and you'll be amazed at all the little details you can put into a seascape without really trying. I'm using little touches of green in here. I think you probably see some little greenish sort of bits and bobs, little bits of seaweed and what have you. So little bits of green in here. Over in here you're not going to see quite as much, it's not as transparent. So my seascape has progressed nicely. And it's time to work on this sort of foreground area. Now again, no beach this time, just shallow water, and I want lots of foamy patterns on here. They take time to do, and I'm going to be doing some time lapse through this because it might take me, well, an hour or so just to put on the basic patterns. But the more you do, the better they look. And the brushes I'm going to be using, well, small round brushes are the king for this sort of job. I'd like to use a filbert, but I'm afraid they're just too big. So I'm going to use one of these small round brushes, maybe that one as well. I'll put up some little reference photographs for you to look at as well, including an interesting one of a wave crashing seen from above, something we don't often see. And of course, let's not forget, we still have to paint the sailboat. Let's get on with it. If we have a look at some of our reference photographs, I'll pop one or two of them up here in the corner, you can see that obviously we're painting on a flattish or sort of a slightly level sort of surface here, so all of the patterns have to be slightly more elongated. As they come down closer in front of us, we start to look more downward onto them, and they tend to sort of fill in all the gaps. The colour I'm using, it's a little bit of my Seascape white colour. I've mixed up another little bit of lavender here. This colour is from yesterday and it's dried out. And the colour wants to be anything but white. There's a clue for you, because in the initial stages, I just want to map out roughly where things are going to be. Now, if I just draw some shapes for you, so things in the sort of the mid-ground area need to be sort of more that sort of shape, okay? Sort of more sort of oval shape. Things this far back tend to be that sort of a shape. In other words, they tend to be sort of climbing the face of the wave. And things right in front of you can afford to be a little more open. Okay, so you can sort of see open, slightly closed and more closed, and that's just at the perspective as things go away from you. So the patterns down in here can be much more lively and open. And again, as you see, I'm just doing sort of these foamy patterns in a series of sort of circles. And as I mentioned, this will take a little time to build up. And you see I'm just going to do some more of these little patterns. And as I get towards the wave, some of these shapes won't be open. They're going to be more sort of just streaks of colour like that. Okay, they're going to be just streaks of colour up the face of the wave. And you notice sometimes I push with my brush, and I'm using again the side of my brush far more than I use the point of my brush. I find it gives me a slightly more random shape, and you see I also tend to roll the brush in my fingers a lot, and it gives me some sort of lovely unexpected patterns. You see there as I just rolled the brush down the beach, down the wave, and lifted off. Lifted as I lift off. It produces some nice patterns, and then press in hard. And you can create this nice sort of foam pattern on the beach, on the wave, you know what I'm saying. So get used to playing with your colours, but anything but white. If I want to add another layer of detail on top, I don't want it to compete with what's already on here. So use small amounts of paint. You can have some of this going up into the base of the wave too. And again, use those little reference photographs I'm going to pick up, and do your own research. Go and look on Pixabay and have a look and see some of the amazing photographs on there, and build yourself a lovely sort of surf pattern for your waves. Now, I'm going to do some time lapse through this. I'm going to probably spend about 45 minutes, maybe an hour, and I'm going to do this in several stages. So this initial stage is in what I call sort of the grey stage, or the darker stage, and then I'll come back and I'll pick out some little speckles and some little highlights and put some flashes of colour on here as well. But say, this is the first stage. So there's the initial sort of foam patterns laid out on the beach. Notice how I maintained that flat look to my wave here. I kept all the patterns nice and open, and how I started to tilt the angle of my brushwork to follow the face of the wave. So in other words, it follows the lay of the land, as Bob would say, and I started to include a few little streamers of light going up the face of the wave. Now, I kept this all very muted and all very underbright. You can see how bright the foam is compared to this. And the idea is now is that I want to come back in and just go back over some of these and just pick out a few little highlights, a few little sort of sparklers. Now, I could switch brushes maybe and go to something a little bit cleaner, maybe a bit smaller, but I kind of like to stick with the same brush if I can. It makes a particular pattern like this that if I find if I change brushes, I get a different sort of pattern. So I just quickly dry cleaned that, and I'm going to pick up some white, and of course the first thing I'm going to do is to tone it right down. I'm going to make it into that lovely Seascape white colour, and a little more paint this time, maybe just a little bit more paint on my brush. It's still pretty dry. As I say, it's not pure white, but I think I've got a little flash of some lovely yellowy golden colours in there. And I want to think about light maybe coming through, even coming through the eye of the wave and catching maybe this area of the beach. So let's think about adding a few little sparklers in here. And these go right on top of the ones I just put on there. So I'm just using these almost like a little shadow colour, like we did here with the wave. And I'm just putting some of these on top. So it looks like the sunlight's just catching it. And it doesn't take a lot to really make this suddenly come alive. And you'll find this across paintings. You'll often see it on seascapes where someone's got like the setting sun, some nice highlights on a wave, and it comes across onto the beach, and you'll start to see the sort of the reflection of the sun, and that's called a light trail. And the idea is it's to sort of take your eye across the surface of the water. And as you see here, I'm just picking out just a few of the sparklers. I think this here would be casting a lovely bright light across the surface of the water here. But this all looks very overly bright, and this all looks very kind of dark in the background here. So just as a quick, I can jump around a little bit. Why not take a little bit of this slightly brighter colour in here and pick out the edges of a few little waves as well. And again, this is just to sort of keep that light trail going. And again, I'm just going to roll my brush across the surface of some of these waves. In between the waves, the water is flat. This is obviously the crests of some waves, so you get this sort of effect happening in the gap between waves. And I'm just going to roll some colour into my seascape here and there, and even up the faces of some of these little waves. Look at that. Wow. Isn't that fun? Let's put some foam on the top of that wave there. Yeah. Zing. So you see, my little wave painting it's a slow progress, taking your time with it, adding these little zingers of light into your painting. Don't rush at it, folks. It's too much fun to rush. So enjoy playing with it. I'm going to do a little bit more of this detailing, then I'm going to start moving on to my sailboat. I don't even know if I've got time to even put a rock into my painting. It may just be one thing too many, but I do want to get to my sailboat very soon. I forgot to turn the microphone on. I was blathering away to myself and suddenly realised actually that the camera wasn't recording anything and the microphone was flickering away and nothing was happening. So what you saw me do there is I used a little flat brush. I picked up some just off-white. It's white, just a hint of the Seascape colour. And I literally just blocked in the sail that I think is catching the most sunlight. And then I used a little bit of the blue-grey colour here for the sail on the right. Have a look at the reference again. I put this sail is in shadow and this one's in highlight, so I switched them around. So that's what you didn't hear me say, or didn't hear me do. And that's just literally to play with the lights and darks on these sails, get a little bit of definition into them. They don't have to be pure white, they need to be off-white colours, and you want to get some detail into them, so you want to get a few little bits of shadow in here and there so that it looks like that it's material that's taut and it's got some kind of little shadows and stretches in it. So if I had this to do without a deadline of getting a nice video for you, then I would probably spend, well, I would leave my painting to sit for a couple of days, at least a couple of days, possibly 3 or 4 days before I attempted to do this, so that I could rest my hand on the canvas without causing any problems, just adding a little more shadow there. So I probably wouldn't be doing this now, but I'd be using one of these, which is a marl stick, just a piece of wood with, this was an old door hook on the back of a cupboard door, and I just screwed it to the end with a little block of wood, and that just literally sits on the top of my canvas, and I kind of steady it with my finger and thumb at the bottom, and that gives me somewhere to rest against with my hand or the side of the brush. I've got a nice firm place for my hand to rest. There we go, and I can just drop in the rest of my little sailboat. There we go. I'm going to let that sit for a minute and come back and do a little bit more detailing later on. And of course the very last thing to do in my painting is to take some of this Seascape white colour, again tiny drop of ochre, and add those final little speckles, splashes and crashes to your wave. You can see on that last little sequence I put in just a little bit more shadow to my little sailboat, and that really made it more three-dimensional. Now, and so at this stage all you're looking to do here is just add those fine little speckles to your waves. You're not looking to reproduce and completely change everything. And once again, take your time with this. It'll create the most natural looking splashes to your waves, far better than you could do if you tried to individually sit there and put them in one at a time. And I think with that we have a finished painting. So there we have it, my little impression of a Bob Ross classic, Waves of Wonder, and it was all inspired by a lucky dip. Thank you, Terry. She picked the number, I did the painting. Now don't move, there's some more lovely paintings for you to watch coming right along. Happy painting, people.